We can come to tracking from different pathways: naturalism, bushcraft, science, hunting, ecology, and many more. Invariably, the practice of tracking seems to switch a forgotten part of ourself, a root deep in our brains and bodies that is primal and essential to us. The learning of tracking not only induces fun, but also a sense of belonging, a sense of understanding, and a profound relish for more. Becoming a tracker may require a whole life or even several generations of passing skills, and yet this infinite learning process is more exciting than discouraging. Let's explore how tracking might be a doorway to freedom and to rewild our senses, our relations, and our very being. As an introduction to this talk, I'd like to share with you the beautiful words from David Abram's book, The Spell of the Sensuous. Humans are tuned for relationship. The eyes, the skin, the tongue, ears, and nostrils all are gates where our body receives the nourishment of otherness. This landscape of shadowed voices, these feathered bodies and antlers and tumbling streams, these breathing shapes are our own family, the beings with whom we are engaged, with whom we struggle and suffer and celebrate. For the largest part of our species' existence, humans have negotiated relationships with every aspect of the sensuous surroundings, exchanging possibilities with every flapping form, with each textured surface and shivering entity that we happen to focus upon. All could speak, articulating in gesture and whistle and sigh a shifting web of meaning that we felt on our skin or inhaled through our nostrils or focused with our listening ears, and to which we replied, whether with sounds or through movements or minute shifts of mood. The color of sky, the rush of waves, every aspect of the earthly sensuous could draw us into a relationship fed with curiosity and spiced with danger. Every sound was a voice. Every scrap or blunder was a meeting with thunder, with oak, with dragonfly. And from all of these relationships, our collective sensibilities were nourished. Today, we participate almost exclusively with other humans and with our own human-made technologies. It is a precarious situation, given our age-old reciprocity with the many-voiced landscape. We still need that which is other than ourselves and our own creations. So what is rewilding and how tracking can carry us in this direction? Online, we can find two definitions of the term rewilding. One describes the biological ecological process, which is, open quotes, a form of ecological restoration with an emphasis on recreating an area's natural uncultivated state. This may require active human intervention to achieve. Approaches can include removing human artifacts such as dams or bridges, connecting wilderness areas, and protecting or reintroducing apex predators and keystone species. Close quote. The other definition focuses on human society. Open quotes. Rewilding encourages the conscious undoing of human domestication and returning to the lifeways of hunter-gatherer cultures. Though often associated with primitive skills and learning knowledge of wild plants and animals, it emphasizes regenerative land management techniques employed by hunter-gatherers and horticulturalists, as well as development of the senses and fostering deepening personal relationships with members of other species and the natural world." Close quote. So, my point in this talk is not about removing dams or bridges, but is rather focused on how we can reconnect with our senses and relationships with other than humans. And you will see how this tends to solve many of our contemporary ailments. Owls have evolved to be among the most skilled night predators of rodents. Deers have evolved to efficiently convert grass into muscle, and all over the world, dung beetles can transform mammal scat into food for their larvae and themselves. Just as these animals, we evolved with special characteristics and skills for hundreds of thousands of years, but unlike them, we recently massively changed our habitats and habits. And by recently, I mean only some 8,000 to 10,000 years ago, which is indeed recent for us as a species. We Homo sapiens have been roaming on this planet for almost 300,000 of years. In these last 3% of our existence, we massively altered ourselves and the world around. We replaced mobility with sedentarity, wild food with cultivated food, foraging and hunting with cultivating and breeding, belonging with possessing, and living in small bands of related with living in huge stratified colonies. As you might notice, living in a civilization that is entirely based on domestication of wild animals, plants, and landscapes induces inevitably a certain kind of domestication of ourselves too. Mostly we are no longer wild, and we might have lost a little bit of our autonomy in the process of calling ourselves civilized. We are no longer able to find all of our food by ourselves. We generally ignore where the nearest spring of fresh water is from our home. And no one has the combination of stamina and skills anymore to trail and run down a hoofed animal for a whole day in the sun. So, when I speak about tracking as a rewilding skill, I mean that the practice and learning of tracking can bring us closer to our roots by leading us to do just what our species was designed to be good at. In the process, tracking guides us to spend more time outside, focusing on non-man-made patterns and interactions. In this presentation, I would like to speak about some of the most common ailments of our contemporary lives and how the practice of tracking can tend to solve these while leading us on a wilder path. I'll explore the conditions of anxiety, carelessness, and isolation, and how these can be transformed into confidence, gratitude, empathy, and belonging by the practice and learning of tracking. Well, let's start with anxiety. World Health Organization reports that anxiety disorders are the most common mental disorders worldwide, associated with immense healthcare costs and a high burden of diseases. 1/3 of the population in Western countries is affected with anxiety during his lifetime. That's a lot. I mean, that must say something about our lifestyle. Now, let me tell you a little story. Imagine you're walking along a trail, surrounded by plants, with no names. The trail is sporadically marked by mysterious scats left there by some elusive animal. On the edges of the trail, you spot different mushrooms that might all be poisonous as far as you know. As the night falls, all the weird whistlings, groans, and hoots are now replaced by even more cryptic sounds coming from those enigmatic shadowy bushes and trees, with no name either. What can you do? Come back home and turn the light on? Well, for a moment this might work and bring some comfort, but beyond the walls, this scary world is still there, waiting for you, and anxiety won't leave so easily. This scary world is the world on which you depend to live, whether you acknowledge that or not, whether you live far from it or not, whether you understand it or not. That's even more scary, isn't it? Although this illustration could seem a little bit exaggerated, I do think that it's representative of a scary blind walk through modern life experienced by many contemporaries. And this blind walk is the perfect setup for anxiety. What can we do about that? Why not tracking? This could very well be an antidote to anxiety. And let's see why. Tracking builds confidence. In the process of learning tracking, essentially, we learn to name our surroundings. We explore the relationships of animals with the landscapes, the plants, and ourselves. This gives us an idea of where we are and who we share the area with, which is crucial to feel rooted and to find our bearings. This builds confidence. Through the practice of tracking, the stories unfolding around us become tangible, and our role in it can make more sense. Now, the scat belongs to the fox. This huge tree is an oak, and oaks produce acorns that might be eaten by the fox and even ourselves. The hole in the ground is the entrance of a den. Those remains, in front of the den, are wing feathers from a woodcock, and it indicates the presence of young fox inside. While tracking, you build a better understanding of your surroundings. Not only you learn which animals are present, but you can also relate them with specific features in the landscape. And in doing so, you also open the door to learn about the plants that they use and that you might use as well. Tracking knowledge leads to a more complete knowledge, the knowledge of the ecosystems, not just the knowledge of animals, and the more knowledgeable you are, the more confident you become. This practice reveals the land in which we live. It makes it perceptible for us. The land is not a frightening chaos anymore. The scenarios observed through tracking are creating a rope between you, the land, and its inhabitants, and that rope in return is creating a feeling of security and confidence in a more predictable environment. A higher level of understanding induces a higher level of confidence. Gratitude. Every item, every food, every material, everything in your life comes from the earth. Although most of us had to live a hunting and gathering existence quite recently, none of what's around us comes from another planet. We don't gather and transform the resources ourselves anymore, and this might contribute in some way to the anxiety of ignoring where things are coming from and what do they become after use. In autumn, when the fresh deer trails lead you toward an orchard, you might expect to eat some ripe apples and pears. In spring, when you hear this delicate melody coming from the song thrush returning from his trip in the south, you might ask yourself, is he singing just for his mate or also to enjoy this clear evening sky with me? You experience together the same energy of the lengthening days, and maybe you are thrilled that they choose your garden to nest this year. Tracking has the power to link us to the ecosystem on which we depend. This timeless and tangible dependence is still the same. maybe the natural structure that supports our lives is weakened, maybe it's ill, but still we can sense its presence through tracking and feel grateful that it's still there. All around the world, hunter-gatherers tend to consider their life as a happy one in a generous environment populated with benevolent spirits. As for the Australian Aboriginals and the African Bushmen, their lifestyle involves a practice of tracking to its highest standards. They know their land intimately. In his 1972 essay, The Original Affluent Society, anthropologist Marshall Chalins indicates that hunter-gatherers of Arnhem Land in Australia dedicate around 4 hours per day to the research and cooking of food. The rest of the day is spare time for crafts and resting. This average is strikingly similar to the Dobi Kung Bushmen of Botswana, who collect as much as 85 different plants and 54 different animals for their alimentation during the year, whereas most people today depend predominantly on only 12 plants and 5 animals. No wonder that the Arnhem Land Aboriginals and Kung Bushmen feel grateful to their environment. And no wonder the employee who works 8 hours a day and 5 days a week to procure almost enough for himself feels tired and anxious. Even if we don't hunt and gather, tracking allows us to see the bountiful resources of nature and its complex relations of reciprocity still at work. This appreciation of one's habitat is a strong leverage to transform anxiety into gratitude. Tracking pulls us on the serene path of the ones who know where to search and how to procure. Now, let's explore 2 other symptoms of our modern life: isolation and carelessness. In 1950, a Harvard professor of psychology asked Elizabeth Marshall Thomas, who was living among the Bushmen, to use the famous Rorschach psychology test with them. The result of the test diagnosed all the Juwa Bushmen as schizophrenic. Normal, in quotes, people were supposed to see each ink blot as an isolated unit, but the Juwa men saw them as composites, finding one little thing here and another little thing there, and relating them together. But this, of course, is the best way to view the environment, not as a scenery, as landscape, as many of our contemporaries view it, but as a series of small, very distinct messages creating a larger story. A freshly broken twig, flattened grass without dew where an animal was resting, the footprints of a certain kind of beetle that begins to move about after the day has reached a certain temperature, each tiny item an important clue as to what has taken place in the vicinity. The tiny items produce the whole picture, and these men were hardly schizophrenic. They were accomplished trackers related to their place. So, when nature is viewed as a wallpaper, we run the risk to disconnect from it. We feel isolated, and this opens the door for carelessness. As we've seen, anxiety is a direct result of this feeling of isolation. But another vicious effect is the fact that we cannot care for what we don't see. If we don't recognize this complex web of reciprocity called nature as a living system in which we are included, we simply cannot imagine how not to destroy it. One cannot be blamed for spoiling that which he didn't know was there or which he so partially perceived. The 6th mass extinction that we are witnessing will in no way be altered by small adjustments like shorter showers or electric cars. The changing needed can only be considered through a deep understanding of nature's cycles. And guess what? Tracking can help us to do just that. It helps building the necessary knowledge and empathy to reveal a more balanced way of relationships with our ecosystem. Let's talk about belonging. When the wallpaper is slowly translated into an organized world with its patterns and predations, its symbiosis, its life cycles from birth to death, it begins to look very familiar to our human world. Those two worlds, through the lens of tracking, tend to merge in just one, in which man is not necessarily above or aside, but fully in. We feed from the natural world, just as every animal and plants do. We will die and feed other organisms, just as every animal or plant will. Although we choose the most massive marble stone to cover our remains, still we will be welcomed into multiple stomachs. The tracker can't ignore that. All of these realizations are made very clear by the time spent outside, looking at tracks and signs, or following trails from a feeding area to a bedding area. Animals wake up, get a little cleanup, gather with others, or go by themselves in search for food, and then they nap. Then eventually they take some time to upgrade the den or to explore a new land and meet new mates while avoiding dangers. They feed their youngs and they teach them the skills needed for their survival in a given environment with specific seasonal resources and scarcities. Does that sound familiar? Our existence is fundamentally the same as theirs. Presumed hierarchy in our view of the world tends to flatten into a more even existence of all beings when we track them. Similarities are more relevant than differences. Tracks and signs will show different habits from an animal to another, but they won't show a huge difference of living standards like modern man can experience in his life. The study of tracking reminds us the egalitarian view of the world common to our ancestors, acknowledging hierarchies for what they are, which is to say, man-made abstractions. And this realization is indeed creating feelings of brother or sisterhood with the natural world. We feel that we belong. Empathy. Empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. Open quotes. If you follow enough deer trails, then you'll be able to tell the story of the deer. Close quotes. That's what John Ryder told me. And sure enough, while following the trail, the tracker sees what the deer saw. While observing the gait, the tracker guesses their state of mind, from calm and steady to fast and spooked. The tracker gets to know their habits and their favorite places, depending on the season of the year or the hour of the day. When we try to read the tracks, we need to learn about the behavior of the animals of the area to make realistic hypotheses. From learning about them, we can imagine their movements and motivations, and in doing so, we experience empathy with them. When you come upon a dug-out field vole nest, you can feel sorry for the little mouse, or feel happy for the fed marten, or both at the same time. But whatever the case, all of a sudden, there is a life and death story unraveling in front of your eyes. And this is not just a pack of dry grass on freshly dug earth anymore. You can envision the action, and empathy is coming in the game. Therefore, tracking favors relationships with the land and its inhabitants. This triggers empathy, which allows us to better understand our kins of the wild, and in doing so, we step in the scenery and start to belong again. Isolation vanishes and consideration rises. For all these benefits, I can't urge more the need to massively teach tracking as a solid ecological and social measure to help the next generations to rewild and better their future. These qualities have the power to transform ourselves into better humans and build resilient communities, all of which might be much needed in the future. Concluding this talk, I'd like to share a little story that emphasizes the importance of our cultural guidelines in our relation to the natural world. Because when cultural guidelines are mistaken, this can erase our common sense or even cause blindness to the point where it's going against our own survival abilities. Maybe the recent guidelines of our last 100 generations were not the right ones after all. Maybe the pivotal moment of change for bringing back the art of tracking at the heart of our cultural guidelines again could be right now. These birds are called honey guides, and their story is told in the book The Old Way by Elizabeth Marshall Thomas. Open quotes. Cultural guidelines can be fragile, especially those of the old way. A cultural shift in birds called honey guides is an example. In the past, these birds would locate a beehive and then find someone to open it for them, choosing someone who would want the honey, such as a person or a honey badger, also called rattle or African badger. The bird would flutter around in front of the helper to attract his attention, or perch on a branch and give a special call, like a small box of matches being shaken rapidly, as the biologist Richard Estes describes it. Everyone, man and beast alike, knew about honey guides in those days. So, the helper would know what the bird had in mind and follow it to the hive. The bird would fly conspicuously from tree to tree, waiting for the helper to catch up before moving on. At the bee tree, the bird would wait while the honey hunter did the hard work, breaking open the hive, sweating bees, and getting stung. When the melee was over and broken bits of the hive lay scattered on the ground, the honey guide would fly down and eat the larval bees, which was the whole purpose of the venture. The birds made no discrimination among people, anyone would do. I myself was once led by a honey guide in Angola, but honey guides no longer try to lead people. The hunter-gatherers are gone, and the tourists in the cars don't understand what the birds want, nor would they follow the bird or open the hive if they did. So the whole honey hunting partnership has collapsed and vanished. The birds of today have no memory of the ancient partnership between their kind and ours. I hope, though, they still lead honey badgers. The ancient honey badger population has not been replaced by legions of ignorant, uncaring honey badgers, so the resident honey badgers would still understand. Close quote. Telling you this story makes me feel so sorry for the little honey guide bird. And I wonder, what could have been the cooperations of my ancestors with the robin or the magpie? I hope that our descendants could benefit from our practice of tracking and restore one day these conscious relations with the feathered and furry ones. Thank you very much for your attention.